My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, a marketing director in Seattle, and the mother of a 7-year-old boy who still believes Christmas is the one night every family chooses kindness. A week before Christmas Eve, my father called and told me the family party would be adults only, no children. That included my son. I asked him twice because I thought I had misunderstood. He said they wanted a quieter, more sophisticated evening, and suggested I leave my son with my late husband's parents. His tone was calm, almost bored, as though excluding his grandson from Christmas required no more explanation than changing a dinner reservation. I almost refused to go. Instead, I decided to make a brief appearance, deliver the gifts, and return to my son before dessert. But when I opened my parents' front door, I heard children screaming with laughter. My sister's 3 kids were racing around the tree. My cousin's children were decorating cookies. Every child in the family seemed to be there except mine. Then my father looked directly at me and said, "These children deserve to be here." Something inside me went silent. Not broken. Silent. The kind of silence that comes right before a person stops begging to be treated fairly. I reached for my phone, opened my banking app, and looked at the monthly transfer I had been sending my parents since my husband died. My father noticed the screen and asked what I was doing. I told him I was ending their financial support immediately. He stared at me and said, "After everything we've done for you?" What happened next turned the entire Christmas party against them and exposed a lie my sister had helped them hide for months. Before I tell you exactly what my father said and what happened after I walked out, tell me what time it is where you are and where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. 8 months earlier, I had been standing in the same kitchen where my father later made that comment, staring at a framed photograph of my husband, Ben, holding Noah on his shoulders at the waterfront. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. Ben had died in a construction site accident 3 weeks before, and every ordinary task felt like proof that the world had continued without asking my permission. Noah was 6 then. He sat at the breakfast counter building a bridge from wooden blocks, while I tried to answer insurance calls, school emails, and messages from relatives who kept writing, "Let me know if you need anything," without ever saying what they were actually willing to do. Ben's parents never made vague offers. They showed up. His father, Robert, drove Noah to school when I could not get out of bed. His mother, Diane, stocked our freezer, sat beside me during meetings with the insurance company, and never once treated my grief like an inconvenience. My own parents came to the funeral, stayed for the reception, and left before the dishes were cleared. My mother said crowds exhausted her. My father said he had an early meeting. My older sister arrived late, hugged me for less than a minute, then spent most of the afternoon telling relatives how difficult the tragedy had been for her. That should have surprised me. It did not. Growing up, my sister was the family's proof that my parents had succeeded. She was outgoing, polished, and skilled at telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. I was quieter. I questioned things. When she received an A, my father took us to dinner. When I received one, he asked why it was not an A+. When she married, my parents paid for a ballroom, a live band, and a honeymoon contribution. When Ben and I married at a small garden venue, they complained that the drive was inconvenient. 2 years before Ben died, we attended my father's birthday dinner. He raised his glass and praised my sister for building a real family people could be proud of. Ben's hand tightened around mine under the table. Noah, then 4, was coloring beside me. On the drive home, Ben said, "One day they're going to make Noah feel the way they've always made you feel." I told him he was wrong. After Ben's death, I discovered he had been right. At my parents' house, Noah's curiosity became evidence against him. He asked how the antique clock worked, why snow looked blue in the shade, and whether birds got cold on power lines. My father would sigh and hand him a tablet. My mother would tell him to stop interrupting. Meanwhile, my sister's 3 children sat on the sofa with headphones on, barely speaking to anyone, and my parents praised them for being easy. One Sunday, while I was driving home from another strained visit, I heard Noah's voice from the back seat. "Mom, do Grandma and Grandpa get tired because I ask bad questions?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Your questions aren't bad." "Then why do they look angry when I talk?" There was no answer that would protect him without lying. I told him some adults confuse quiet children with good children, and that curiosity was not something he needed to apologize for. He nodded, but his reflection in the rearview mirror looked unconvinced. That was the moment grief changed shape inside me. I was no longer only mourning Ben. I was beginning to understand that I had spent my entire life chasing approval from people who were now teaching my son to chase it too. Have you ever watched your child get judged for the same trait your family once punished in you? It creates a different kind of anger, one that does not disappear when the visit ends. The life insurance settlement arrived 5 months after the accident. After legal fees and final expenses, the amount deposited into my account was a little over $300,000. It was not a prize. It was the value strangers had assigned to the future Ben would never live. I divided it immediately. Most went into conservative investments. A separate account was created for Noah's education. I kept enough accessible to cover emergencies, therapy, and the possibility that I might need to reduce my hours if Noah's grief became harder to manage. Every dollar had a purpose connected to the life Ben and I had planned. I told almost no one the exact amount. Then my parents invited me to dinner. My mother made pot roast, which she only cooked when she wanted the evening to feel important. My father poured wine before I arrived and kept asking unusually careful questions about my job, my mortgage, and whether the insurance company had treated me fairly. My sister was there too, although she had claimed earlier that she would be out of town. Halfway through dinner, my father put down his fork. "How much did they pay you?" I knew exactly what he meant. I also knew I should not answer. But grief had left me exhausted, and some childish part of me still believed honesty might create closeness. "A little over 300,000, I said. The room changed. My mother's eyes widened. My sister stopped chewing. My father leaned back as if he had just learned that a hidden resource had been sitting within reach. "That's more than enough for one child," my sister said. I looked at her. "Enough for what?" She shrugged. "College. A house someday. Whatever you're planning." My father said I was being overly cautious. My mother reminded me that family helped family. Then, as if rehearsed, they began listing rising property taxes, medical bills, repairs, and the cost of maintaining the lake cabin they used twice a year. I ended the conversation and left. For a week, no one called. The following Tuesday, my father requested a video call. When I answered, my mother was sitting beside him with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked pale. My father said her cardiologist had found an irregular rhythm and wanted more tests. He spoke slowly, emphasizing the expense of specialist visits and medication. My fear overrode my judgment. I had already lost Ben without warning. The thought of losing my mother, even a mother who had rarely protected me, made it difficult to think clearly. "What do you need?" I asked. My father glanced toward my mother before answering. "Temporary help. Just until things settle." My sister joined the call a few minutes later. She announced that she would contribute $500 every month. Then my father turned to me. "With your salary and the insurance money, $1,000 should be manageable." $1,000 a month was not small, but they framed hesitation as selfishness. My mother pressed a hand to her chest and whispered that she hated asking. My sister said she had 3 children and only one household income, yet she was still willing to sacrifice. My father reminded me that they were my parents. I agreed. After making the first transfer, I sat alone in my car outside Noah's school. Rain struck the windshield, and the banking confirmation glowed on my phone. I said aloud, "I think I'm buying their love." Hearing the words made me ashamed, but I continued the payments. The promised temporary help became permanent within 2 months. My mother posted photographs from the lake cabin after telling me she could not afford a new prescription. My father replaced his television. My sister praised me in family conversations for finally stepping up, while never showing me proof that she was contributing her share. Worse, the money did not buy support. When I asked my mother to pick up Noah because Diane had a medical appointment, she claimed she had a migraine. When I needed help during a late client meeting, my father said children made him too tired. Once, after they refused again, I called Robert in a panic. He was already in his truck before I finished explaining. That evening, Robert brought Noah home carrying a cardboard model of the solar system they had built together. My father had declined to spend 40 minutes with his grandson. Robert had spent 3 hours helping him paint Saturn's rings. The next morning, another $1,000 left my account automatically. What would you do if your family turned your husband's death into financial leverage, then acted as though your child was the burden? I wish I could say I stopped immediately. I did not. I was still confusing obligation with love. By December, the payments had continued for 4 months. Each transfer produced the same cycle: a warm message from my mother on the first day of the month, a brief phone call from my father about responsibility, then silence whenever I needed anything. Christmas was supposed to interrupt that pattern. Ben had loved Christmas with an almost embarrassing sincerity. He made cinnamon rolls from scratch, wore a ridiculous sweater covered in blinking lights, and let Noah choose one new ornament every year. Our first Christmas without him was already going to hurt. I wanted Noah surrounded by family, noise, and enough tradition to keep the empty chair from becoming the center of the room. 1 week before Christmas Eve, I took Noah to a science store downtown. He had been saving allowance money for a build-your-own robotic arm, but it cost more than he expected. I secretly bought it while he examined a telescope display. As the cashier wrapped the box, my phone rang. My father told me the Christmas party would be adults only. Across the store, Noah was moving his hands excitedly while an employee explained how a telescope mirror collected light. I watched him through the glass display and asked my father whether the rule applied to every child. "Every child," he said, "no exceptions." I asked why the family had suddenly changed a tradition that had always centered on children. He said my mother wanted an elegant dinner. He mentioned wine, fragile decorations, and adult conversation. Then he added, "You can leave Noah with Ben's parents. They're used to taking him." The cruelty was hidden inside practicality. My father knew Noah had lost his dad. He knew this was our first Christmas without Ben. Still, he spoke as though my son were an item that could be checked elsewhere for the evening. I called my sister after we left the store. She answered on the fourth ring, and I heard children shouting behind her. "Did Dad tell you about the adults-only party?" I asked. There was a pause long enough to become an answer. "Yes," she said. "Mom mentioned it." "And you're arranging childcare for all 3 kids?" Another pause. Then she said, "We're still figuring things out." Her voice had the careful flatness she used when protecting a lie. I asked directly whether her children had been invited. She became defensive and accused me of making Christmas difficult. Before hanging up, she said, "Maybe just respect what Mom and Dad want for once." That sentence stayed with me. On Christmas Eve, I dressed Noah in the red sweater Ben had bought the year before. I took him to Diane and Robert's house, where stockings already hung with his name between theirs. I told him I needed to deliver gifts at my parents' party and would return quickly. "Can I see Grandma and Grandpa tomorrow?" he asked. I kissed his forehead and said we would talk about it later. Then I drove across Seattle with gifts on the passenger seat and an uneasiness I could no longer explain away. When I turned onto my parents' street, the driveway was full. Several vehicles had booster seats visible through the windows. I parked, stared at them, and finally understood that the rule might never have been about children. The front door was unlocked. The moment I stepped inside, a child ran past me wearing a paper crown and carrying a fistful of sugar cookies. Another child shouted from the living room. Someone had turned the television to a holiday movie, and toys were scattered beneath the piano. For several seconds, I stood in the entryway holding a bag of gifts, while my mind rejected what my eyes could see. My sister's 3 children were there. 2 of my cousins had brought their kids. A teenage nephew was helping younger children hang candy canes on the tree. There were at least 11 children in the house. Only Noah had been excluded. My aunt noticed me first. She hugged me, looked behind me, and asked where Noah was. Before I could answer, my uncle called from the dining room. "Where's the little scientist? I brought something he'll love." The questions came from every direction. Was he sick? Was he with Diane and Robert? Would he arrive later? I saw genuine confusion on their faces. No one else had been told the party was adults only. Across the room, my sister looked at me and immediately looked away. My father was near the fireplace, laughing with a glass of bourbon in his hand. My mother was arranging appetizers. When she saw me, her smile tightened for half a second, then returned as though nothing were wrong. I set the gift bag beside the door and opened the camera on my phone. I did not start recording because I wanted internet attention. I started because my parents had rewritten reality my entire life. I needed a record before they convinced everyone that I had misunderstood. I walked into the kitchen and asked my mother to speak with me in the hallway. My father followed without being invited. "You told me no children were allowed," I said. My mother glanced toward the living room. "Keep your voice down." "Why is every other child here?" She adjusted the cuff of her sweater. "Not every child." The answer was so cold that I almost admired its honesty. My father stepped closer. "This is not the place for one of your emotional confrontations. You created the confrontation when you lied to me." He said they had made an exception for children who knew how to behave. My mother added that my sister's kids understood boundaries, while Noah asked too many questions, touched things, and demanded constant attention. I reminded her that his teachers described him as thoughtful and respectful. I reminded my father that Noah had lost his dad 8 months earlier. I asked whether either of them had considered what it would do to him to learn that every cousin had been invited to Christmas except him. My father's jaw tightened. "Those children deserve to be here," he said, nodding toward the living room. I stared at him. "And Noah doesn't?" He did not answer directly. Do not twist my words. My sister entered the hallway. She said I was creating drama and that Noah was happy with Ben's parents. I asked how long she had known her children were invited. She crossed her arms and told me it was none of my business. At that exact moment, her youngest son threw a deviled egg at his brother. It missed, struck a framed photograph, and fell onto the carpet. Another child screamed. A glass tipped over in the dining room. I looked at my father. "These are the children whose behavior earned a place here?" My mother said, "Children will be children. But when Noah asks how a clock works, he's disrespectful?" My phone was still recording at my side. My hand had stopped shaking. That surprised me. I had imagined that if I ever confronted them, I would cry or lose my voice. Instead, I felt strangely calm. My uncle stepped into the hallway. He had heard enough to understand. "Richard, did you actually tell Emily not to bring Noah?" he asked my father. My father said it was a private family decision. My uncle laughed once, without humor. "We are the family standing in your house." Other relatives had begun moving closer. Conversations faded. My aunt asked my mother whether there had been a misunderstanding. My mother insisted the evening had become more complicated than planned. I walked into the center of the living room. Several children stopped playing. Adults turned toward me. My sister whispered that I was embarrassing everyone. I told her embarrassment was not the same thing as accountability. Then I explained, clearly and without raising my voice, that I had been told the party was adults only. I said I had left my 7-year-old son with his paternal grandparents because my father had promised there would be no exceptions. I pointed out that every other child had been welcomed. My aunt covered her mouth. A cousin muttered, "That's disgusting." My uncle moved to stand beside me. My father tried to interrupt. "Enough. You've made your point." "No," I said. "I haven't." I held up my phone and showed the banking app. The recurring transfer was visible on the screen. For 4 months, I have sent Mom and Dad $1,000 every month because they told me Mom's medical expenses were putting them under financial pressure. The room became still. My sister's husband, Kyle, looked at her. "And you've been sending 500?" My sister's face changed. She glanced at my parents, waiting for one of them to rescue her. Kyle repeated the question. She said they could discuss it at home. I opened the transfer details and pressed the button to cancel the recurring payment. The app asked for confirmation. I turned the screen toward my father. "You believe my money deserves to be in this family, but my son does not. That arrangement ends tonight." I confirmed the cancellation. My father's face lost its color. My mother gripped the back of a chair. For the first time all evening, my sister looked frightened. My father said, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I looked at him and thought of the funeral they had left early, the school pickups they had refused, the questions they had mocked, and the money they had accepted. "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked. He opened his mouth, but my uncle answered first. "They've taught her how much peace costs," he said, "and she just stopped paying." Kyle was still staring at my sister. "Show me the transfers," he said. She tried to take his arm, but he stepped away. My father told him not to let a misunderstanding ruin Christmas. Kyle ignored him and asked again whether $500 had been leaving their joint account every month. My sister's silence answered first. Then she admitted the truth. She had never sent my parents anything. The entire contribution had been invented. My parents had asked her to claim she was paying $500 so I would feel ashamed refusing to pay twice as much. They knew I would compare myself to her. They had used the same rivalry they created in childhood to manipulate me as an adult. Kyle looked physically sick. He asked whether she understood that their own bills were overdue while she had been helping pressure a widow for money. My sister said she had not thought it would go this far. My aunt cut in. "It went exactly where you wanted it to go." My mother began crying. Not quietly. She accused everyone of attacking her in her own home while she was dealing with heart problems. I asked whether the medical crisis had been real. She said the tests were real. My father added quickly that the costs were real too. I asked why they had renovated the lake cabin deck 2 weeks after my first transfer. My cousin pulled out his phone and found my father's social media post thanking a contractor for the long-overdue upgrade. Another relative remembered the new television. Someone else mentioned the weekend trip my parents had taken in October. The financial story collapsed piece by piece. They had medical expenses, but not the emergency they described. My $1,000 had not protected them from ruin. It had protected their lifestyle from inconvenience. My father tried to regain control. He pointed at me and said I was humiliating my mother over money after everything she had endured. That was when I blocked his number. I did it in front of him. Then I blocked my mother and my sister. I held the phone where they could see each screen. "This is not only about money," I said. "You excluded a grieving child from Christmas because his personality irritates you. You lied to me, used Ben's death to pressure me, and trained Lauren to help you do it. I will not give you another dollar, and I will not give you access to Noah." My mother said I could not keep her grandson from her. You already chose not to have him here." The sentence ended the argument more effectively than shouting could have. Kyle told my sister to collect the children's coats. She begged him not to make a scene, and he said the scene had been happening for months. He had simply arrived late enough to see it. He announced that he was taking the children to his parents' house and would be staying there after Christmas. When my sister asked whether he was leaving her, he said he needed time to decide whether he could remain married to someone who had helped defraud her own widowed sister. Several relatives began gathering their belongings. My uncle said he would not celebrate in a house where a child had been deliberately rejected. My aunt followed, then 2 cousins, then another family. Within minutes, the room that had been loud with music and conversation filled with the sounds of zippers, coats, keys, and children asking why they were leaving early. My father stood beside the tree, ordering people to calm down. No one listened. One cousin had recorded part of the confrontation after noticing my phone. Another relative summarized what happened in the extended family group chat. Messages began appearing before anyone reached the driveway. Family members who were not at the party asked whether it was true. Screenshots of my father's lake cabin renovation post circulated beside the explanation of my monthly payments. I did not post my recording online. I sent it only to myself and later to my attorney, who advised me to preserve evidence in case my parents claimed the transfers had been loans or tried to contact my employer. But someone else's short video spread through the private family chat. By midnight, the version of themselves my parents had protected for years no longer existed. My father caught me at the door. "You'll regret turning the family against us," he said. "I didn't turn them against you. I told them what you did." My mother stood behind him holding the untouched gift I had brought. She asked whether I was really willing to destroy the family over one Christmas invitation. I picked up the bag. "No. I'm willing to protect my son after a lifetime of letting you define what I deserved." I walked out. In my car, the adrenaline disappeared. My hands shook so badly that I could not insert the key. I cried. Not because I wanted to return, but because ending a toxic relationship still feels like grief when you spent years hoping it would become loving. Then I thought of Noah waiting beside a tray of cookies at Diane and Robert's house. I started the engine. When I arrived, he ran to the door and wrapped both arms around me. Robert was helping him build a small motor from a science kit. Diane handed me hot chocolate without asking for an explanation. No one demanded money. No one required silence. No one measured whether we deserved to be there. Later, after Noah fell asleep beneath a blanket on the sofa, I told them everything. Robert's face hardened, but Diane simply took my hand. "You never have to earn a place in this family," she said. The next morning, my aunt called. She said nearly everyone had left within 20 minutes of me. Kyle had taken the children and told my sister he wanted a formal separation. My parents had spent the rest of Christmas Eve calling relatives, but most refused to answer. What do you think of a grandfather who rejects his grandson but depends on that child's mother to finance his comfort? For years, I would have searched for an excuse. That Christmas, I finally stopped. 6 months later, my life no longer felt like the aftermath of an explosion. It felt like something being rebuilt carefully, one honest piece at a time. The $1,000 I had been sending my parents now went directly into Noah's education account. I increased my retirement contribution and used part of 1 month's payment to enroll him in a weekend robotics program. On the first day, he hesitated at the classroom door and asked whether the teacher would become annoyed if he asked too many questions. I crouched beside him and said, "The right people will be glad you're curious." By spring, he was building simple machines with Robert in the garage and spending Saturdays fishing with him at Lake Washington. Diane attended every school event. Noah began calling them Grandma and Grandpa without qualification. They had never requested the titles. They had earned them through consistency. My work changed too. Without weekly arguments, emergency calls, and the anxiety of waiting for my parents' approval, I could think clearly again. I led a difficult campaign, received a promotion, and stopped apologizing whenever something good happened to me. The consequences for my family unfolded through information relatives chose to share. I never asked for updates, but some news reached me anyway. Kyle filed for divorce after counseling exposed more financial lies in his marriage. My sister had hidden credit card debt and repeatedly used their children as leverage during arguments. The Christmas scheme did not create those problems. It exposed them. She moved into a smaller rental and sent me several long emails. Some apologized. Others blamed our parents. I read none after the first. An apology that refuses responsibility is only another demand for attention. My parents lost the monthly support they had expected from me and the social protection they had expected from the family. With medical bills, property taxes, and expenses they had concealed, they sold the lake cabin in April. My father experienced a hypertensive crisis during that period and spent 2 nights in the hospital. I did not celebrate his illness. I also did not let it pull me back into the role they had assigned me. I sent no money and made no contact. At Thanksgiving, my aunt hosted the extended family and invited Noah and me. My parents were not included. That decision was not mine, but they blamed me for it in messages sent from new numbers. Each message repeated the same idea. I had ruined the family. The truth was less dramatic. I had stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own behavior. On the anniversary of Ben's death, Noah and I visited the waterfront where our favorite photograph had been taken. He carried the robotic arm I had bought before the Christmas call. Robert had helped him modify it to pick up small objects. "Dad would have liked this," he said. "He would have asked you 100 questions about it," I replied. Noah smiled. "I would have answered all of them." That was when I understood what my decision had really protected. It was not my bank account. It was the part of my son that still believed his curiosity deserved an answer, his grief deserved patience, and his presence deserved a place at the table. Revenge was not watching my parents lose the cabin or my sister lose her marriage. Revenge was refusing to become what they had taught me to be. It was building a life in which Noah never had to purchase belonging, perform for affection, or shrink himself to make adults comfortable. Family is not proved by blood, holidays, or titles. It is proved by who arrives when life becomes inconvenient and who makes a child feel wanted without asking what they can receive in return. Would you have cut contact that night or given them another chance? And how would you protect a child from relatives who keep asking that child to prove his worth? I know my answer now. Noah will never again stand outside a family celebration, wondering why everyone else deserved to be inside. Wherever he is loved, respected, and free to ask questions, that is where our family will be.
Thank you for watching another emotional story with us. This video is fictional and intended only for entertainment, education, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that not every apology deserves a second chance, especially when the pattern has already spoken louder than the words. Trust should be rebuilt through actions, not demanded through guilt.